Okay, hello and welcome to the last and the public lecture, which is part of the Frege Lecture series. And I'm really glad to introduce Professor Jennifer Nagel from University of Toronto. And she's a professor of philosophy there. She has written a book titled Knowledge, a very short introduction, and is currently working on another book titled Recognizing Knowledge, Intuitive and Reflective Epistemology. And the lectures she's been giving here are based or related to that book. The Frege Lectures, the overall title was Epistemic Interaction, and this particular lecture, you can see the title up there. I think it tells you that being a skeptic is a really natural thing to do or to be. Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you, Bruno. What a pleasure it is to be here at the University of Tartu. And I really appreciate the chance to have encountered you and to have delivered these series of talks. So as Bruno mentioned, my theoretical work is on knowledge, and I also take myself not only to know about knowledge, but to possess it. There are many items of knowledge that I possess. I know particular mathematical truths. I know facts about geography. I know that human beings are causing global climate change right now. But for the purposes of the talk, I'm going to take a very simple, everyday example, the fact that there's water in this bottle right now. That's something that I take myself to know. The skeptic, of course, can step in and challenge me on any of my claims to knowledge. Can ask me, for example, whether what visually appears to be water might not be some completely different liquid, also clear and colorless in character. I can hold the skeptic at bay for maybe 15 seconds by taking a drink. I am actually thirsty, so this is going to work. And verifying that it's not vodka, if that's the skeptic's suggestion, that that was what was in that bottle. But the skeptic can come back at me. Can come back and can keep coming back. Can suggest that even if it not only looks like water, but tastes like water, it could nevertheless be some other compound that's clear and flavorless and appears to the senses to be water, while its inner structure isn't H2O at all, but something quite different. Or getting more radical, perhaps all the apparent evidence from the senses can be thrown away. We could worry that this is just a dream, or for those of you watching at home, that you're just having a dream of watching a video of a philosophy lecture. Why are you even doing that? That has to be a dream. Or we could worry first personally. Maybe all of this is just some kind of presentation from the evil genius, or your brain in a vat that's being electronically stimulated by some kind of supercomputer that's generating an impression as of a coherent external world. Something I have to tell you about the skeptic is that the skeptic really does get under my skin. It's a big part of my theoretical position in philosophy that we have knowledge, we have quite a lot of knowledge, it's relatively unproblematic, there are a number of ways to gain knowledge. That's my theory. Nevertheless, I can feel the sort of sickening pull, the attraction of skepticism. When I'm actually engaged one-on-one with a skeptical philosopher, I feel like they get me every single time. I feel tongue-tied, it's hard to answer them, and I feel like they are getting the better of me. And they are maybe exposing that I don't really know all the things that I thought I knew, that I took myself to know. I really feel the pull of skepticism. I really feel the attraction of skepticism. There are many kinds of skeptic. Classically, there's a distinction between academic skeptics and Peronean skeptics. Let's start with the academic skeptics. Academic skeptics are the people who actually maintain the theoretical position that human knowledge is impossible. Academic skeptics worry me, but they don't terrify me, because I think they've got problems of their own. I mean, one of the things you can say to anybody who presents themselves to you as an academic skeptic is you can try to just turn the tables on them and say, well, how do you know that? How do you know that it's impossible for human beings to know anything. You can examine the arguments that they put forward to advance that positive conclusion that human knowledge is impossible. You can maybe see some of those arguments have premises that really could be challenged. Academic skeptics often have sort of dubious notions of what exactly you have to have in order to have knowledge. So they don't terrify me. The guys who terrify me are the Peronean skeptics. The Peronean skeptic isn't somebody who is advancing a thesis and positively declaring that knowledge is impossible. The Peronean skeptic exercises his or her skepticism simply as a practice, like the practice of yoga. And the exercises that you do as a Peronean skeptic involve questioning. So as a Peronean skeptic, I'm not trying to establish a conclusion. That would give you a chance to challenge my conclusion. I'm just asking, are you sure? I'm just asking, on what basis do you say so? Every single time you advance something, the Peronean skeptic is going to ask you. It's going to ask you how you know. It's going to ask you questions about what you mean. Peronean skeptics are the worst. They're terrifying. They occupy an extremely powerful dialectic position. If you're a Peronean skeptic and you are on your game, you will never lose an argument. Because no one will ever be able to prove you wrong because you will never actually say anything. You're not putting something forward in the common ground of conversation. You're just challenging what everyone else is doing. And you keep at it and you keep at it. And after a while, people will stop inviting you into their parties. But you might still, they'll still be worried about you, right? They'll still wonder maybe whether you do get the better of them. And I wonder that sometimes, and kind of in a Peronean spirit, like I'm like, oh, Peronean skeptics, they're the worst. And my own little inner Peronean skeptic says, oh, are they? Are they really? Like, I want to raise that question. Maybe these guys have something going on. They're pointing at what seems to be the difficulty of knowledge, the impossibility of knowledge. Maybe, even though they're not saying it, they're showing it. They are really exposing my epistemic frailty with all their poking and all their needling. And here's another thing I worry about. One of the things that Peronean skeptics do is they make you feel very self-conscious about your epistemic standing. Suddenly you're really asking yourself, damn, how do I know that thing that seems to be water really is water? And at that moment, knowledge seems very, very hard to attain. The fact that later I get really casual and I'm like late night on Wikipedia scrolling through random entries and I'm like, oh, wow, and now I know all about, rivers in Colorado or, whatever random entry I end up in. Maybe that's a kind of laziness on my part, that I get down to sort of freely self-attributing knowledge and attributing knowledge to all kinds of other people on the basis often of a very, very casual cue of one kind or another. Does he know that the party's at Bill's place? Yeah, he knows. Sue told him. How do I really know that he knows? The skeptic seems to be operating with a much more disciplined and principled and self-conscious and reflective way of thinking than the way of thinking I exhibit when in casual conversation I describe myself or others as knowing things. So I worry that it's only because I'm lazy that I throw out skepticism and stop inviting the skeptic to the party. Maybe he's really got a point. So there's different theories about why skepticism seems to exert a sort of sickening power upon us. One of the theories is that there's something ultimately going wrong in academia, right? Or that somehow philosophy itself is to blame. So Duncan Pritchard's saying, the apparently visceral pull of radical skepticism is in fact the product of faulty philosophical theory. So there's some intellectual way of thinking about knowledge that puts us on that slippery slope towards skepticism. That actually might be true for some people. It might be true for Duncan Pritchard that the radical, visceral appeal of skepticism for him comes from bad philosophical theory. That's one possible source, and I don't mean to discount it. But I don't think it's the only possible source. I think there's a source that's not necessarily just academic, that could be much broader. And I think there's empirical evidence for this. So regular people who are not at all academics, feel the pull of skepticism as well. So this dates back to some empirical work that I did coming up on a decade ago with regular people. I started out with undergraduates, but the results have been replicated with a bunch of other populations, in which I just described a little scenario in which we'd ordinarily say someone learns a fact. They come to know something, come to know what time it is by looking at your watch. And if you have just a plain unvarnished scenario, people will say, yeah, sure, now she knows what time it is. But if you just start adding just like a little bit of spice, you say, well, you know what, sometimes clocks are broken. Even if you stipulate, this clock is actually working correctly. But you know, you maybe say she didn't look at it for a long time to make sure that the hands weren't stuck in position. Did she really know what the time was when she glanced at the clock? If you start doing things like that, regular people of all kinds will start pulling back from attributing knowledge. And now, instead of saying she knows what the time is, they'll say, well, she thinks that the time is 1:17 p.m. or something. They'll do just kind of a weaker formulation. So regular people can feel that kind of pull as well. Okay, I want to explain where this pull is coming from. Whenever somebody goes in to give some kind of response to skepticism, it's very important to manage expectations. I have a friend who's a lawyer, and he said, you know, when he started out in criminal defense, they got a whole workshop on managing client expectations. So you go into your first meeting with your client, and even if you think you've got a great case, you never say that. You say, oh, you know, we'd be lucky to get, we'd be lucky to get a 20-year prison term here. And then, you know, if they get 5 years, they're grateful or something like that. So I'm going to try to manage expectations a little bit. Whatever I'm going to do right now, I'm not going to give you an argument that's going to persuade the Peronean skeptic that starts from premises that he has to accept. There aren't any premises like that. The Peronean skeptic, if he's a good one, is just maintaining that practice of questioning everything, and they'll question whatever you throw at them. So I can't do that. I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to start out in kind of a common sense position, where I do actually know that 2 + 2 = 4 on Lima is the capital of Peru. And I'm going to give you an explanation, actually an empirical explanation of why the skeptic's argument feels so powerful. And it's not an explanation that, you know, the reason why it feels so powerful is he's right about knowledge. It's not going like that. It's a sort of deflationary explanation. And I'll actually also give you a strategy for how to tame the skeptic. If you do find yourself confronted with one, you can't give him an argument that will prove that he's wrong, but there's a trick, one cool trick. That I'll share with you, that actually does work. It works to do something anyway. Okay, so even if we do know things, the skeptic can make us feel that we don't. So I'm going to start out with a kind of common sense view where, yeah, sure, we know things. And then try to show you why skepticism nevertheless feels very powerful to us. Human beings, therefore, have a built-in natural vulnerability to skepticism, and I think that built-in aspect of our nature is one reason why you see philosophical skepticism emerging independently in the many great philosophical traditions in the world. So there's versions of philosophical skepticism in ancient Chinese philosophy, in South Asian philosophy, in various different branches of Western philosophy as well. We keep coming back to it. Understanding that natural vulnerability that we have isn't necessary to get out of the skeptical moment. To get out of this sort of feeling of skepticism, feeling that, oh God, you know what, maybe I don't know all of that. All you need is a bit of time to elapse, and it really helps to be in a position where you have to act. So Hume's actually right about that. If you're feeling very, very skeptical, go and play a board game with your friends, and that feeling of skepticism will go away. So it's not just to get rid of the feeling. The purpose of the talk is actually to get rid of something more at the theoretical level. It's to get rid of the sort of academic feeling that proper, good epistemological theory would actually come down on the side of the skeptic rather than on the side of the person who believes in the possibility of knowledge. So one of the things I'm going to start by distinguishing is states and their signals. So we can draw a distinction between knowledge itself and the natural detection of knowledge, just as you can draw a distinction between a human being's heart rate and what registers on the heart rate monitor at the hospital. At the hospital, Heart rate monitors often go off with a fairly loud beeping sound. And when that happens, one of two things has happened. Either the person's heart has stopped, which is terrible, and that's something that the medical team needs to act on immediately, or perhaps, and this is more common, the alarm system itself has malfunctioned in some way, and most often when the pulse monitor just slips off of somebody's finger. And that's not like terrible, it actually probably doesn't really affect the health of the patient at all when the monitor slips off their finger. But you know, someone has to go in there and double check and reconnect the monitor. If we learn about how these monitors work, then we can actually respond to them better. I mean, one of the things you could do is like tape it onto the patient's finger or something like that. But I'm going to try to persuade you that we as human beings don't detect states of knowledge perfectly and automatically. It's not like we have, you know, immediate God's eye vision into the beating heart of knowledge. We detect states of knowledge through processes that involve subpersonal inference, through proximal cues. We've got knowledge detection mechanisms, and just like the heart rate monitor, those knowledge detection mechanisms can misfire. The more we learn about them, the more we can be sharp about the boundary between knowledge itself and the absence of knowledge, the failure of knowledge. So the distinction between knowledge and belief is something that's drawn in all natural languages in the world, with knowing being a state of mind that can attach only to truths, where beliefs can be either true or false. Knowledge is something that you can typically pick up in a variety of ways, including perception of the water bottle being on the table, testimony, hearing things from other sources, inference. There's a variety of ways in which human beings can come to know. We can share our knowledge in a variety of ways, either by directing other people's perceptual awareness to a given position, by reasoning explicitly, or just by telling. You might notice that when we direct perceptual attention and when we reason explicitly, we transmit to the other person not only knowledge of a fact, but their own independent way of grasping that fact. They can trust their own powers of reasoning or their own perceptual apparatus now for their knowledge. So if I give you a mathematical proof of a theorem and you understand and you can follow that theorem for yourself, you don't have to take my word for it. If I do want you to take my word for it, you better be perceiving me as knowing, perceiving me as somehow authoritative on the point in question. There's a distinction we're going to keep in mind as we go forward between actually knowing something and convincing someone else that you know it. Just as there's a distinction between real diamonds and things that people might be convinced are diamonds, there's also a distinction between knowledge itself and what's detected as or thought to be knowledge. You can have knowledge that's hard to share. You can spread states of mind that fall short of knowledge. As epistemologists, we're very tempted often to focus on situations in which people challenge claims of knowledge. Those situations are actually atypical. We're ordinarily not interested in challenging what everyone else knows. We're ordinarily interested in absorbing and making the most of what other people know, because we're ordinarily and instinctively epistemically cooperative. And in fact, even the situations in which people are challenged can best be understood against a general background of cooperation. So we're instinctively epistemically cooperative. We are enabled in our epistemic cooperation by norms that we follow without usually being aware that we're following these norms. So I want to distinguish for a moment various ways in which we can interact with each other. So all kinds of species transfer benefits from one member of the species to another. In fact, even different species living together as parasite and host can transfer a benefit. But transferring a benefit is not the same as cooperating. In order for members of a social species to be cooperating, they have to have some kind of shared goal, which parasite and host do not. Parasite and host are not guided by a shared goal. Bees can be guided by a shared goal, something that's innately pre-programmed into them. In the realm of the epistemic, and human beings, of course, can be coordinated in the service of a shared goal if it's something that we negotiate between ourselves and deliberately choose, deliberately adopt. In the animal kingdom, there's a lot of examples of epistemic transfer where knowledge moves from one member of a species to another. But epistemic cooperation is something that is uniquely human. In epistemic cooperation, it's not just that we are doing things which happen to add up to produce mutual benefit. It's rather that we have a shared goal that is epistemic in character. We're trying to come to learn things together, to know things together, and that's something that no other species really has. So human beings actively and interactively update their picture of the world by querying each other and correcting each other. So no other animal asks questions, like the Peroneal skeptic. No other animal corrects its kin or monitors whether others are really taking up their signal. We're the only animal that does that. We're guided in that task by interactively updating our representations of epistemic standing. So we keep track not only of what's going on in the world, but of who knows what about what's going on in the world. So there's various things you need in order to have the capacity for epistemic cooperation, above and beyond a basic capacity to communicate. You need to have some kind of motivation to improve shared epistemic standing. We're a species that, by working together with members of our kind, can achieve things that go far beyond what each one of us could do individually. We can build buildings and institutions by working together in groups that we could never do on our own. We also need to have some kind of representation of shared epistemic standing. Ideally, we'd have perfect awareness of who has and lacks knowledge on any given topic. If we have something perhaps a little bit less than the ideal, but one of the things that we have very powerful are a set of mechanisms to signal when knowledge is needed and when it's been gained. When knowledge is needed, we ask questions, and we're recognized in our asking of questions, and it's a sign of the depth of human cooperativeness that there's an extremely strong norm of question answering. So in corpus work Tanya Stivers has done, she's argued that about 90% of questions that get raised in the course of conversation do get answered. Either they get answered with a direct reply, or they get answered with some kind of confession of a failure of knowledge on the part of the person to whom the question's been addressed. So you can either give an answer or you can say, I don't know. There's a very, very strong norm that you're going to be doing that. And in that 10%, that's left out, most of what you see there are what are called transformative answers, which are still cooperative in character. A transformative answer to a question is an answer which challenges some presupposition of the question. So if somebody asks you, what time is Susan's party starting tonight? You could either say, I don't know. You could say 8 o'clock. Or you could say, actually, Susan's party is not tonight, it's tomorrow night. All of those are cooperative things to do. They're things that are generously bringing your interlocutor up to date on what seems to be the issue that they're concerned about. And just as a matter of descriptive fact, it seems that we are, as a species, very much committed to answering questions. And actually, this is a little bit of the first clue about why the skeptic has such power over us. He just keeps asking questions. And whatever else you can say about human beings, they have a huge instinct to answer them. And so he's playing with that cooperative, generous instinct that we have. Another thing that we have is the capacity to coordinate the joint social action of conversation by emitting signals which indicate when we have gained knowledge. And I talked about this a bit in the lectures leading up to this. We will say, oh, when we learn something, and that's a little bit of a success signal for the cooperative, collaborative project of sharing knowledge from speaker to hearer. Anytime you ask someone a question, you're representing them or positing that they know something about about the topic matter. You're representing them as K+ in the system of conversational analysis that was developed by John Heritage. I'm just going to use his shorthand here. If you tell someone something, you're representing yourself as knowing something and them as lacking knowledge. So you take a different epistemic stance towards them. This is all on the presupposition that the purpose of your conversational exchange is to share knowledge. Whenever somebody makes either of these moves on you, you can either accept the status that they're projecting on you or reject it. You can either, when someone tells you something, take their word for it, or you can resist. You can challenge their epistemic standing, maybe aim to update their map of who knows what. So we've got these parallel projects of learning about the world and learning about our epistemic standing in the world. These are kind of orienteering activities. I was learning last night about Estonian underwater orienteering. This is the most fascinating thing in the world. We have orienteering in Canada, but not underwater. So when you're orienteering, you can achieve your goal of that you might have if you're asking somebody something or telling somebody something, if your initial map of the epistemic gradient was an accurate one. If I think you know when the party is going to start tonight, and you do actually know, and I ask you and you're cooperative, then I can achieve my goal right there. But sometimes I'll learn something when my effort fails, right? One of the things that I can learn is that the epistemic standing here is not what I thought it was, right? And in particular, one of the things you can do is you can actively test your epistemic map by trying to ask or tell somebody and seeing what happens. So I can wonder whether you know something, and just experimentally, I'll try asking you and see if you know what's going on. So when you don't find the beacon in orienteering, sometimes the problem is you, sometimes the problem is the map. There's this kind of interactive thing that we have in conversation that we're always updating the epistemic map as well as the map of the world. We don't start from nothing. We start from a kind of home territory, a set of natural instincts, and we assign to others some kind of epistemic territory within which we see them as knowledgeable, and we take what they say on trust. So that sort of home epistemic zone includes people's immediate feelings, plans, experiences, their immediate memories. That's our instinctively assigned epistemic territory. You can stretch beyond that. If I want you to recognize me as knowing something that's outside of that very familiar, close to home domain of how am I feeling right now, if I want you to recognize me as knowing about global warming, for example, and you're inclined to doubt what I say on this issue, I'm going to have to argue. I'm going to have to produce evidence. That is also playing on a set of natural human cooperative instincts. So I can enlarge the territory of that you recognize me as knowledgeable in by arguing. The fact that we can do this is something that's given tremendous fuel to what I would call the argumentative theory of knowledge. And this is a theory which in some shape or form has emerged at many times in the history of philosophy, and a theory to which many contemporary epistemologists remain in some way committed. So the argumentative theory of knowledge says that anytime you have knowledge, your true belief that P, say, if you know that P, has to be backed up by some evidence that non-trivially supports P. I think where this theory of knowledge is coming from is it's coming from our epistemic test procedures, right? I think that what's really going on is that if somebody resists your claim that P is the case, so if they ask you whether you really know that P, when you say that P is so, which is something that epistemologists do all the time, right? I made the claim that there was water in the bottle, and the imaginary skeptic asked me how I really knew that that was the case. The first thing that I'm going to do instinctively is I'm going to try to back up my claim with additional evidence. I'm going to taste it and say, well, it doesn't just look like water, it also tastes like water. I'm going to try to give more evidence for the claim that I have. But as soon as I start doing that, if the person I'm arguing with is a skeptic, they're going to challenge whatever putative items of evidence I put forward in support of my theory. As soon as I'm committed to the argumentative theory of knowledge, I can, if I'm talking to a skeptic, commit myself to an argument that's never going to end and that I'm never going to win. So underlying our interactions with the skeptic are some basic principles or social rules that we instinctively follow in our interactions with anybody at all. So behind our interactions with anybody at all, we have something that Heritage calls the epistemic engine of conversation. So conversation's driven, in his view, by some sense of epistemic imbalance between the speakers. I've got to tell you something that I take you not to know. I've got to ask you something that I take you to know and I take myself not to know. In order to drive conversation forward, there has to be some reason why we're communicating with each other. There's other purposes, incidentally, also served by conversation, purposes such as affiliation, team building, but epistemic engine is a huge conversational driver. At each turn, you can accept the other person's claim, you can answer their questions, or you can hop up a level and challenge the epistemic map that they've drawn, either by saying, I don't know, if they've asked you a question, or by saying, essentially, how do you know, if they've tried to tell you something. The balance shifts back and forth until the person who was originally represented as lacking knowledge acknowledges that the gradient is now level. There's two ways of becoming level. You can either level up, so both of you now take yourself to have knowledge. You now that someone has given you the answer to your question of where the party is tonight, both of you know where the party is tonight. Or another perfectly possible equilibrium point, and the one that the skeptic is always trying to drag us to, is the equilibrium point at which both of you confess that you lack knowledge. I don't know, and you don't know either. And that's also a point where the purpose of our conversational exchange is done. We're satisfied. We're complete. Neither of us knows, and so it's over. Okay, so we have these sort of instincts. We're instinctively cooperative knowledge seekers, but we're not slaves of instinct. We can override all kinds of epistemic instincts that we have. We have some kind of automatic default to trust people when they make a claim about something squarely within their epistemic territory, when they talk about their homes, their pets, their plans. But occasionally you've got special reason to think that somebody might be mistaken about something close to them. And in those cases, as an epistemically cooperative animal, you can step in and correct them on that point. You can also override cooperative instincts and deceive. But when you do so, you're still relying on the general presence of instincts for epistemic cooperation. There wouldn't be successful deception if it weren't for the presence of trust. We have a lot of natural protection against liars. Sometimes not enough, you might think, looking at contemporary politics. But our natural epistemic protection against liars includes a restriction of the epistemic territory in which we instinctively see other people as authoritative. If somebody says something extremely implausible, it's instinctive for us to challenge that claim. If someone seems to have something to gain from us believing them on that point, we are more likely, as a matter of empirical fact, to be suspicious of what they are saying. And in fact, even when people do have knowledge on a given point, sometimes skeptics can suggest that they have something to gain. The anti-vaxxers can suggest that people who are promoting vaccines are motivated by profit gain for pharmaceutical companies or something like that. But that's also, and in its non-defective use, a protection against liars. When somebody tells you something and they obviously have something to gain from you believing it, that's something that can raise your suspicions about their epistemic standing. And we also have at least some social systems of reputation that penalize lying. Being caught in a lie is something embarrassing, and liars can become outcasts. So behind the sort of instinctively cooperating knowledge-seeking character that we have, something interesting happens when we get into specifically epistemological inquiry. So let's suppose, as is in fact the case, we're instinctively trying to maximize shared knowledge gain. Under those conditions, people don't usually challenge your claims unless they've got good reason to think that you do lack knowledge, right? If they're trying to gain as much knowledge as they can, and you give them something which is in fact an item of knowledge, or which has a good claim to be an item of knowledge, typically if they're out to get as much knowledge as they can, they won't say, no thank you, I resist. They'll take your knowledge from you if they can, if that's what they're trying to do, score as much knowledge as they possibly can. They're only wise to resist your claims if they have reason to believe that what you're saying isn't knowledge, if they have reasons to have doubts about your epistemic standing. Your instinctive response to a challenge on your epistemic status is to try to generate arguments. That's something that we very naturally do, to try and claim contested epistemic territory. So skepticism is, if you like, the Achilles heel of cooperative conversation. The skeptic is presenting himself as cooperative. He doesn't seem to have anything to gain from you accepting the philosophical theory of skepticism. In fact, he seems to be doing something that's very, very productive and very, very constructive. He seems to be engaged in the project of trying to dispassionately answer a question of fundamental interest for human beings, namely the question, what is knowledge, right? But for every single claim you make, he's challenging your epistemic standing. He is sparking your argumentative defense mechanisms by doing that. Now, you might wonder why we don't have natural defense mechanisms against the skeptic the way that we do against the liar. And I think there are several reasons for this. A big one is that our fellow human beings are naturally and instinctively knowledge seekers, because we recognize that the more knowledge we have as individuals and shared between us, the better we can pursue our practical projects, in particular our projects that require shared knowledge to coordinate action. So if we're naturally pursuing all kinds of knowledge, we don't often have to encounter people whose whole aim in life is to destroy and remove knowledge. People are typically cooperative and trusting, so they're not typically accidentally skeptical. Deliberate skepticism is relatively rarely in anyone's interest. At least it was relatively rarely in anyone's interest before certain new forms of social media made it very easy to pursue and promote skepticism strategically, particularly in areas such as climate change. Okay, so the suggestion ultimately is that what the skeptic is doing is pulling the heart monitor off of your finger. The skeptic is sounding an alarm that naturally should be sounded when you lack knowledge. And it's an alarm that is meaningful. It's an alarm that has a lot of value, because other human beings are generally good spotters, not only of what's going on with states of affairs in the world, but other human beings are generally good spotters of what their fellow human beings do and don't know. If you actually have knowledge and you're challenged, it's a little bit of a false alarm. But even false alarms can make you panic, right? If the false alarm gets sounded over and over and over again, then you might stop listening to it. And that's actually a problem in another way, because if we're, as philosophers, too dismissive of skepticism, then we can fall into a problem on the other side of the equation, which is we can fall into the problem of dogmatism, in which we think that questions and challenges are never appropriate. And of course, they are sometimes appropriate. They're appropriate exactly in those instances when people really do lack knowledge. So Complete skepticism, in which every single claim is always challenged, is unproductive. The extinction of skepticism, in which no question is ever challenged, is also unproductive. What is productive and what is valuable for us is to have a kind of selective skepticism where claims that really are dubious do get challenged. Okay, so a couple last points. Ordinary knowledge attribution happens in a social context. And in ordinary settings, one of your best sources of evidence on the actual epistemic status of the people that you are communicating with is what other people also agree or how other people also evaluate. Who stands as an expert or who stands as an authority. Your individual sense of who knows what is very heavily shaped by the recognition of others. So if I think that global climate change is happening, if in fact I know that that's the case, this is because, it's not because I've conducted individual private research on temperatures in a large number of places in the world. It's because I have trusted certain authorities who are also widely trusted and appropriately trusted by others. But one of the things we can recognize by looking at the academic problem of skepticism is that the recognition of epistemic standing can be shaped by factors other than the pure nature of knowledge itself. So we can, in some cases, be essentially investigating the limits of the test mechanism. And I think that's something that's happening in the philosophical encounter with the skeptic. So I promised you I'd give you a trick for dealing with the skeptic, and that's my last slide. If you encounter a skeptic and you've got to deal with this person, one of the things you're going to realize very, very quickly is that you're not going to be able to give a positive answer to the questions that he or she is asking you that will stand unquestioned or unchallenged. That's not going to happen. And so you can be asking yourself, oh, well, how do I answer the skeptic's questions, right? If he keeps asking me and asking me, and I feel, because I'm a cooperative person and I sense that very strong norm to be cooperative and to answer. And I don't want to, as a philosopher, just slam the door in this person's face and say, you're wasting my time. You know, I do want to say something to these questions that keep being asked. What exactly do I do? And here's one kind of interesting strategy that I find effective. If you answer, you're going to be stuck because you're going to be challenged. If you can move yourself into the position of questioner with the skeptic, this is always a power move. So the skeptic asks you whether you might just be a brain in a vat. And it's always good to ask, why are you asking me that? It's always good to draw attention to something which inevitably seems to be part of the shared common ground of the conversation, which is the evident, obvious public fact of the conversation itself. You are actually encountering another person. You are actually, even with the skeptic, engaged in communication. And that's a fact that's very hard to deny. So you can try to turn the tables on the skeptic and draw attention to your shared predicament of being in a communicative situation with another. And you can hope to maybe bring the skeptic around to seeing the value of the pursuit of knowledge. Or if not, if you can just keep yourself in that position of asking the skeptic the questions, you can get it to be the case that he's the one who walks out of the room when he's really annoyed with your persistent questioning and not you. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this clear and really useful lecture. And the next time I see a skeptic, I know what to do. So please, let's have questions. If you have a question, then you will get a mic. So, okay.
Thank you. Since the title of the talk was The Natural Origins of Skepticism, I would like to ask this question in kind of a historical framework. So I understand that skepticism kind of gets a bad rep in our day and age because it could be kind of annoying, but I can't help but think that our modern conception of skepticism comes from this Cartesian way of thinking that you doubt and doubt until you reach like a firm base. But maybe if you look at it historically, I can't help but think that it was probably seen as a cure for something like dogmatic philosophy that would, kind of insist that you follow the philosophy rather than ask questions. And off the top of my head, I can think of something like Stoicism. So, is this a historically correct way of looking at the origins of skepticism? And the second part of my question is that, generally speaking, radical skepticism doesn't play a significant role in our everyday life. And as someone like Bertrand Russell would say, that radical skepticism is, quote, psychologically impossible. Do you think that skepticism is a worthwhile intellectual stance to have, or do you think there is something like a healthy dose of skepticism that we need to have? Thank you.
To take your second question first, I think there is such a thing as a healthy dose of skepticism. I think it's good and appropriate to be skeptical about claims which are, in fact, epistemically well-founded, or even that you have very good reason to believe are epistemically ill-founded. So I think some measure of skepticism can be valuable. I'm very interested in the claim that radical skepticism is psychologically impossible. I think that's probably true. I think it's very, very difficult to maintain in practice a purely Peronean attitude of refusing to accept any non-evident thing. I think that is extremely difficult. Nevertheless, the character or figure of the radical skeptic is one that has challenged us throughout the history of epistemology. And I think it's challenged us for reasons that are very natural and that are rooted in our social nature as epistemically cooperative animals. I will agree that there have been times in the history of philosophy and times in human social history when skepticism has been very valuable. I think particularly around questions of religious tolerance. It's been extremely valuable for people to be really challenged on the epistemic standing of their religious beliefs, and I think those challenges are often entirely appropriate. So there can definitely be something beneficial about at least mild forms of skepticism. So I would absolutely agree with that. I think skepticism is very ancient. It arises in many different philosophical traditions. Some measure of it can bring some benefit. But I think to the extent that the skeptic actually succeeds in making people doubt that there's any such thing as knowledge, the skeptic is actually leading people down the wrong path and making them and giving them actually a false belief about our epistemic predicament. I think it's very important to realize the value of skepticism in promoting goods like religious tolerance, but it's also very valuable to realize the goods that can be gained by recognizing in a sort of realist way that there is knowledge and that it's worth pursuing, right? We wouldn't want to have a society in which there are no universities and there is no research because we see the value of those things for human beings.
Thank you. So in this talk, you focused, as you said, only on this Peronean skepticism, which you distinguished from academic skepticism. And so the Peronean skepticism, as I understand, need not be an academic skepticism. So the Peronean skepticist is just this ordinary person who goes around and annoys people, making them doubt their own knowledge when they actually have knowledge. Yeah? Yeah. So could you perhaps outline in some more detail, like what on your view is precisely this relationship, how this thesis that you put forth here relates to academic skepticism? So do you think that even though Peronean skepticism is bad, is there something good to be still said in favor of academic skepticism? Or do you just reject academic skepticism as well, and therefore you think that Peronean skepticism is problematic as well?
Okay, so I think actually, this is a good question. I think actually academic skepticism ultimately fails in its own terms because it makes claims that it can't defend. But Peronean skepticism is just more worrying for me because it's a practice which is suggestive of something very troubling. It's a practice which is suggestive of, you know, the failure of the epistemic enterprise. So that's why I find the Peronean skeptic really, really troubling and very, very difficult to argue against. And I think the Peronean skeptic is doing something that is more powerful exactly because they're very, very consistently playing on the cooperative mechanisms that make conversation possible for us. So you notice one of the things that the Peronean skeptic is doing is he's always granting you something. He might grant you that it appears to you that there's water there, but still try to challenge the, like grant that for the purpose of argument, but still try to challenge the conclusion that you are drawing. So the Peronean skeptic can give you just enough to keep that conversation going without ever letting you establish any kind of positive epistemic position. The academic skeptic doesn't just grant you things for the purposes of argument. He will actually allow some positive claims to be made. But I'm never convinced of the legitimacy of those claims. I think those claims are just, the academic skeptic turns out to be himself vulnerable to a deeper kind of skepticism, or himself ultimately kind of self-contradictory. So if it really were the case that human beings were incapable of knowledge, one of the things that you'd be incapable of knowing is the truth of academic skepticism.
Related to this, a bit related to the same question, I have this conception that, particularly in philosophy, a moderate form of skepticism is actually considered like a virtue. So maybe in the rest of disciplines like science and not philosophy, it's good to have this positive view and this, like, not naive, but with this confidence in knowledge. But it might be the case that in philosophy we are supposed to be actually the ones who doubt and, you know, like the ones who are poking the rest of what is considered to be knowledge. And I think that this tradition of considering philosophy as precisely doing that, just poking at what we are supposed to know, to bring like down dogmas and things like that. Aren't we actually doing that?
Oh, that's a lovely question, and I think a lot of great philosophy can begin with what seems like a profoundly skeptical question. Mm-hmm. But most philosophy, even if it starts from a moment of very deep what seems to be skepticism about a very fundamental issue, a moral philosopher might raise the question of how can anything have value at all? You know, most philosophy doesn't just end with an unending series of questions, right? Most philosophy does actually try to struggle forward and produce something positive, some kind of positive theory. I think there is some value within philosophy to having some people within our ranks who are individually skeptical all the way down the line, right? I think those people can keep us honest and can challenge us in areas where perhaps our beliefs or even our dogmatism is inappropriate. So, you know, for the good of the community, it's extremely valuable that there are some people who are relentless gadflies. But I would think most philosophy that happens, even if it starts with a question that can seem from the outside to be incredibly skeptical, most philosophy is constructive and often valuably so.
But should be, then?
But should it be like that? Well, I think actually, yes, I think actually progress in philosophy is possible. I think, and I think philosophical progress has a very direct and overall, in the history of human civilization, positive impact on the lives of human beings, right? There would be a time when, you know, a woman could not have given this lecture, for example, or when, you know, when people are held in slavery. And the fact that those times are over actually has a lot to do with philosophical arguments.
Thank you.
To which I'm grateful.
Thank you for the lovely lecture. I'm just trying to be a little bit provocative, just asking, how do you know that people are knowledge seekers? Because you were saying very, very beautifully that knowledge is valuable because it helps us to pursue our projects more successfully, and I would just like to bring counter evidence that in post-truth society people seem to not to be interested so much in getting more knowledge, but they seem to be interested in having very strong beliefs, even if they are not true beliefs, like about people believing that Earth is flat and there is vaccination is bad and climate change is not happening. And what they seem to be interested in is that that they want rather some kind of security, or they want to believe that somebody knows. So it's like more a question about authority, not knowing or questioning or finding out the knowledge themselves, but just like trying to find somebody who has knowledge. And my question was, I have been working on the theories of trust, and just to think about like speaker trust as one kind of interesting question there is that a speaker who invites you to trust her is not merely to rely on your own judgment, but to rely, instead of making your own judgment, rely on that she has evidence, she knows. And just trust somebody who has this kind of knowledge. And my question here is that she presents then herself as trustworthy, as honest, as knowledgeable, and having taken precautions against misleading you. And because she is thus trustworthy, you can believe her testimony without weighing all the evidence. So it's this kind of trust. It brings me to some kind of question there is that instead of just finding out more evidence there, you actually, because evidence and trust are not related together, it is rather that evidence and knowledge are related together. Would you agree that in these questions of just what people actually want and how they place their trust, evidence doesn't play any role? It's only a matter of belief there.
Okay, well, I think there's a lot going on in that question. Thank you for that. I will say that human beings naturally want knowledge, but they want a lot of other things as well. And sometimes some of the other things that they want, along with wanting knowledge, can come into conflict with wanting knowledge. So you're absolutely right. There can be circumstances in which we want comfort, we want affiliation, we feel alienated. We might be driven towards the warm embrace of an online conspiracy theory community. Those are absolutely things that can happen. And there are epistemic pathologies and vulnerabilities to which we're susceptible other than the call of skepticism. I think that's absolutely right. It's very appropriate to observe that. I think even somebody who is an anti-vaxxer online late at night is nevertheless going to want knowledge. They're going to want a lot of knowledge from other people during the regular course of their day. They're going to want to know whether the supermarket is still open. They're going to want to know things about their place of work, the tools that they need for work, where they're going to get the things that they need to live. So any kind of cooperative action that the person has to undertake with other people is going to be more successful if they have some shared knowledge with the people with whom they're cooperatively interacting. And one of the problems in the internet world is that you can end up playing around with theoretical positions in a way that's kind of divorced from your practical daily actions. So you end up playing around with questions of migration or immigration, even if you don't have physical daily contact with the actual human beings who are at stake and who are involved in these issues. And so in those kinds of circumstances, it can also be very easy for you to become convinced by misleading pictures of what the reality actually is, whereas if you were physically and face-to-face interacting, acting in the real world, it might be harder to have such grave misconceptions. On the relationship between knowledge and evidence, I'm not entirely sure that I see that kind of divorce. So I think I'm with last year's Frege speaker, Williamson, in thinking that knowledge and evidence are very, very closely aligned, that we don't have some kind of evidence whose epistemic status is just a question mark from which we get knowledge. I think anything that counts as evidence, as real evidence, has to itself already be knowledge for us. So if our perceptual systems deliver evidence, that's because they deliver knowledge. That's because they actually do already reflect the character of the world outside.
Next in line is Thomas, and then
Thanks. So my question concerns the history of skepticism and sort of how to understand what's going on there. I mean, kind of like Socrates seems to be kind of around the corner in these discussions all the time. So one way to understand, so Plato thinks, Socrates thinks, Aristotle thinks, all these people think that if you do have what they call episteme, you can always bring the other person to their level. So the assumption is that when you have this thing that they're interested in, then you can always offer arguments, you can offer conclusive arguments, and get the other person to your level, to the K plus or whatever. Now one way, so I think what you kind of maybe hinted at is that they might misunderstand what knowledge is in a way, that this idea that knowledge can be communicated and it's important in communication, so they take it too far to an extent. Another way to understand it would be that they're not quite interested in what we mean by knowledge, but some sort of a higher cognitive achievement. And I think it kind of makes sense to sort of be interested in whether there is some sort of a cognitive state like understanding or expertise or something like that, that actually does meet these requirements. So if you are in this state, then you are able to offer up good arguments for the other person to accept what you believe and so on. So you might think, I mean, so that it would be a good way maybe to understand what Plato and Aristotle are doing, that episteme is not knowledge, but something cooler, something higher up, right? And you might think that when we talk about like expert knowledge, for example, so we expect experts, to provide arguments for what they believe in and all these sorts of things. So in that case, maybe skepticism has like a bit more bite that, okay, so you might know, but you don't have this higher state that is sometimes required. And that, philosophers in the history of philosophy have actually been interested in. So that would be kind of a different story, so they're not mistaken. They're talking about a slightly different thing. So what do you think about that?
So thank you for that. That's actually a very interesting, very constructive suggestion. And I would say that knowledge, although knowledge of a proposition is kind of the optimal epistemic state that you can be in with respect to that proposition, there is a state which is in some way higher, which is having some kind of iteration of knowledge on it. Not only knowing that something is the case, but knowing that you know, right? That sort of more reflective level of awareness is something that I think we could distinguish from the basic level of knowledge. So a completely unreflective creature, like a chicken, could know that there's grain in front of it, right? But not be in that not have the reflective capacity to be aware of how it is that they know that. Whereas creatures like us maybe can ascend to that higher level of reflection. And it's a very interesting suggestion that that's what Socrates and Plato were concerned with. I'm sometimes a little bit worried with what they want to say about perception, for example, right? Like the suggestion that maybe perception isn't really a source of knowledge insofar as it's just directed at these, fluctuating appearances down here. Knowledge would have to be of the invariant, of the forms. So they start into some kind of divorce between the objects of higher and lower knowledge, which I think is metaphysically problematic. I don't see why we couldn't have full-blown knowledge just through ordinary perceptual faculties, and then think of higher order iterations of knowledge as being available to us through the exercise of those perceptual faculties in concert with strategies of reasoning and so on. I want to have some kind of resistance to the full-blown Platonic picture, as attractive as I find it. I also really like the idea that even if there is some kind of potential confusion between knowledge and the sharing of knowledge is itself something that has terrific epistemic value, and I think that's probably right. I think that's a good point.
Okay, thanks for the talk. So I'm kind of curious about the signaling and monitoring. So the analogy with the heart monitor and how much work that might actually be doing in terms, because like if we get desensitized to heart rate monitors going off all the time because there's slippage, that's a serious problem. Like for all of the cases in which it's just fallen off the finger, there might be one where someone's actually dying and you need to deal with it. I'm curious, like, well, what about when knowledge and skepticism comes into play? So, and maybe outside of like philosophy or the academic field. So if I'm constantly encountering skepticism in something like online communities of anti-vaxxers or climate change deniers or evolution deniers or whatever it may be, it seems like those might be cases in which proper desensitization is totally called for. Like no matter what anti-vax stuff comes up in front of me, I should just treat it as complete nonsense and just go on doing my knowledge gaining things the exact way I always would, or my knowledge retaining skills in the exact same that I would. So in that case, it seems like, at least in certain cases, it seems like very far away from the heart rate monitor one, where like one like properly ignored negative signal is really problematic, whereas I don't see like the same type of analogy, at least in certain other domains with like, and I think especially now where there's like rampant propaganda against certain things, like the correct thing to do is to become desensitized and just step back and ignore all of that area. Or I don't know, you might think that there's other things like maybe you shouldn't step back and ignore, but you should confront and like try to change people's minds. But like, turns out that doesn't really work that well either, so yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much for the question. I'm never quite sure how far to go with the metaphor or what to do with it, like whether we should say, yeah, you know, the anti-vaxxers, we should say that that monitor in room 412 keeps going off, but it's broken, so don't respond. Or would it be better to say, the anti-vaxxers, yeah, that monitor in room 412 keeps going off, let that patient die. So yeah, I'm not quite sure what to do with the metaphor on the fly. But I think one thing we start doing with anti-vaxxers in particular is we start recognizing their contributions as not being cooperative communication, right? We start actually pathologizing the communication. We don't hear that as a question anymore. We hear it as a symptom, as something that's being driven by forces that we want sociologists to explain to us. How did people end up in these communities? And they actually often end up in these communities because they're, you know, anxious. They have all good motivations. They're anxious about the health of their children. They're suspicious of certain aspects of modern medical science. And maybe there are some good reasons to be suspicious of some aspects of modern medical science. They just somehow picked the wrong boat and got onto it, and it's a boat that's going over a waterfall. So yeah, I think there are certainly cases in which you can sort of start to pathologize communication. I do feel like I want to tread carefully here because I'm worried about, for example, politicians who don't want to be held accountable by a media which is largely devoted to finding out the truth of what's going on, who start saying that everything is fake news, fake news, fake news, fake news, trying to whip up skepticism about every single media report that you will hear. You know, I think we want to have some strategy of resistance to that, right? We want to have some way of defending institutions which are actually in the business of producing knowledge. And that may actually mean having to do the task of increasing transparency about reporting mechanisms and so on to make it clearer to people how news organizations actually function.
Okay. Hi. So I really like how the lectures have been quite interdisciplinary, and you've drawn on a variety of disciplines, and one of them has been conversation analysis, particularly in this lecture. And so I was trying to pinpoint the role that it plays, like what contribution it's making to your thinking on this. So the accusation you're making against the Peronean skeptic is that they're kind of tricking us into thinking that we don't have knowledge that we do have.
Yeah.
And then the CA stuff is part of an explanation of how the skeptic is doing that there are like these, they set up these sequences that are without end. And that somehow leads us to think we don't have knowledge when we do. I was wondering whether you could say a bit more about that, about how. So on the one hand, you might be possible to explain the point or make the point without appeal to the CA stuff. And if it's not, like, there's something that's added by appealing to the observations that these sociologists are making about how these conversations unfold. And I was just wondering whether you could say something a bit about what of value comes out of that, rather than a version of an explanation of how we're tricked out of thinking that into thinking that we don't know something when we do, which you might attempt without appealing to the observations that are made by these sociologists.
I think the function of the work in sociology to which I'm appealing is just empirical. So I want to say it's an empirical fact about me that I keep feeling instinctive drive to answer the skeptic's question. But it's not just an empirical fact about me in the sense that it's like some weird idiosyncrasy of mine or something that I inherit because I'm an academic and we're supposed to present ourselves in a certain way. It's something that human beings in general, in conversations of all types, seem to feel. This is a general pattern of human nature for which there's abundant empirical evidence within sociology. So and the sort of sequence of tricks that the skeptic is playing on us are tricks which have a very predictable effect. They're tricks which have a natural purpose. And in most conversations where people are out to gain knowledge, not out to strip away pretensions of knowledge, that natural purpose is something entirely constructive and entirely adaptive. You can see when you look at that work, oh yeah, that makes so much sense. That we would have these capacities and that we would have these instincts and that we would naturally and interactively use questioning and correcting in order to jointly work together to improve not just our picture of the world, but our picture of who knows what. And it's just a very, very interesting downside, Achilles heel vulnerability of this system, that if somebody wants to get everybody level, but not to get everybody level at the level where we've all now shared positively what we know, but just to get everybody level where we're all like, okay, I guess now we don't know anything at all. You can drive down as easily as you can drive up. These mechanisms kind of are bidirectional. And usually we just rely on the background fact that generally people are out to get knowledge, not to strip it away. Generally, people are pro-social, constructive, and concerned with projects of acting and collaborating with others that are going to require common knowledge for their success. So that's just sort of a general background default. But we can suspend that and work just to challenge. We could just work to challenge. And so the conversational analysis literature is just supposed to show that I'm not just making it up when I say that, yeah, you know, if somebody challenges you, you'll be driven to answer them. There is some kind of background empirical fact about that. And it's a fact which, in general, is adaptive and constructive for our species. It's just open to this, to this bizarre and very interesting form of what I think might ultimately be a kind of abuse. It's abusing the system.
So at some point you commented that you're not so worried about local or selective forms of skepticism.
In fact, I think it can be very healthy.
Right. But then I was wondering, well, one thing is like this, overall skepticism of the Peronean or the academic. On the other hand, there's this very local skepticism that applied to certain maybe subject matters or even certain particular claims. But then there's something in between, right? There's kind of still kind of local, but quite broad skepticism about ways of knowing. So somebody who says, look, I only believe what my sense experience tells me, but I don't believe anything else. I don't believe in stuff built on inference. I don't believe in any kind of a priori putative knowledge, right? So what would you say about those forms of skepticism, which just target certain ways of knowing and just reject them altogether, right? Because these seem to be quite worrying too,
okay.
but...
Yeah, I think those forms are actually often much more counterintuitive than they might appear at first. If you don't believe in testimonially transmitted knowledge, then you don't know that John Locke ever existed, right? You don't know that Antarctica is a place unless you've been there, right? So testimonially transmitted knowledge is absolutely enormous, and it seems to play a huge role in our ordinary joint actions with other human beings. So I think it's actually really hard to maintain if someone claims not to believe in inferential knowledge or not to believe in testimonially transmitted knowledge. I think that's actually a relatively weak position, and it's pretty, that kind of position gets pretty easy to attack, not least because whatever considerations they might have to support their positive attitude towards perceptual knowledge, it's typically not that hard to demonstrate that there's something quite parallel that would support inferential or testimonial knowledge. So like in particular, if perceptual knowledge is valuable for you or is trustworthy for you because it seems to arise from well understood causal mechanisms, you can start explaining causal mechanisms behind inference or testimonial transmission as well in ways that make them sound sort of equivalently good. So I think that's why I'm not so worried about that.
So, interestingly, when you mentioned John Locke and knowing whether John Locke existed, so John Locke himself denies that
I was very conscious of that, yes.
Okay, yeah, and you have the same, so what Locke does is that he says that you can't get knowledge by means of testimony. And
yeah, and he has a bad argument for it, too.
Right, but you have the same thing going on in a bunch of other philosophers, like Plato, Aristotle. I mean, in ancient Greece, almost no one thought you could have episteme by means of testimony. So that's another reason to think that maybe they're not talking about knowledge but something else. So just, or they're sort of like completely like hugely misunderstanding sort of the extent that we have knowledge. So because they would exclude everything we know by means of testimony from the range of the scope of knowing, right? So in essence, they have to be either hugely mistaken or maybe talking about something else.
Yeah, and I think testimonial knowledge can really, really easily appear as problematic because in order for me to transmit testimonial knowledge to you, you have to see me as knowing, which is why it can appear really, really problematic from the start as soon as you start to become self-conscious about epistemic states. So I think, I think there's a natural explanation for why testimonial knowledge is historically pretty problematic. It's also easy to think of bad cases of, what you might want to call pseudo-testimony or misleading testimony. Those are very easy to come up with and hard to deal with epistemologically.
But there's also this sort of like, if you're required to, give reasons for P, right? And by means of testimony, we usually don't get these reasons.
Right.
That seems to be sort of, in a way, the driving sort of force why the ancients are sort of really inclined to say that, if you believe that P, just because an expert says that P, you have a justified true belief, but you're not going to count as knowing because you cannot yourself give reasons. The only reason you can give is that the expert said.
Yeah, your knowledge is secondhand rather than firsthand. You've allocated your trust. Let's hope you've done that appropriately. Again, if you refuse to allocate any trust, then you're not going to know that HIV causes AIDS. There's just the range of stuff you will not know is absolutely enormous. It's very, very limited what any one person learns firsthand. Even if you are a scientist, you're relying on all kinds of testimonial evidence about the machines that you're working with. So the erasure of testimonial knowledge is actually an enormous loss, and I think it's a great gain for epistemology if we can come up with theories that vindicate it and reclaim it.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk as well. I really enjoyed it. from your characterization of the skeptic, I got the impression you think that skepticism is a real social vice, that it can potentially be extremely socially divisive, especially if it kind of passes a certain threshold. And so, well, I kind of half feel that maybe you'd be in, you'd kind of group yourself with Socrates' accusers, you know, that it can, yeah, have a seriously detrimental impact on the kind of cohesion of society. And so I'm wondering whether what kind of norms follow from your talk. Like, are we justified in imposing punitive measures on skeptics? So you mentioned not inviting them to the party. And, you know, according to someone like Mill, for example, that would be one of the worst kinds of punitive measures. The social ones are really crushing. But maybe that's really kind of necessary if we want to kind of have a healthy, functioning, cooperative, flourishing culture.
Can I answer this already before you continue?
Absolutely,
because
absolutely.
I would never want to be on the side of Socrates' accusers. And I think actually,
sorry, I am being a bit polemic.
Socrates is not a strictly destructive skeptic at all. I think Socratic dialogues afford a huge amount of knowledge. A great deal of this knowledge is negative in character, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I think of, you know, the opening of Plato's Republic is giving you a whole bunch of ways not to think about justice. Don't think about justice as tit for tat. Don't think about justice as repaying your loans. Because think about it, there could be a case in which a friend has deposited his weapons with you for safekeeping, and he comes to get them when he's out of his mind. Would it be justice to give it to him? And so you've learned something. Hey, you've learned a certain philosophical theory is wrong. And I think a lot of us spend a lot of our lives, you know, sort of in the grips of bad philosophical theories, and it's such a gift from Socratic dialogues to be able to be released from those terrible theories. And you know, I think I almost always agree with every single negative conclusion that you encounter in a Platonic text. So I do think there is something very valuable. I think this is exactly because Socrates is not a skeptic. Because Socrates doesn't respond when you get to don't give that guy the weapons when he's out of his mind. He doesn't respond to well, why would that be bad, right? So he kills somebody. Why is killing somebody? At least he doesn't do that there, right? Like in other places, when the question is, you know, the value of human life, there might be an issue about whether death is an ill, right? But he doesn't do it there. And I think that's because he's one of the good guys. That's because he is constructive and he is actually giving us knowledge. So there's things that Socrates lets rest, and he lets a lot of the right things rest, even though they are largely negative conclusions. You know, this is how you shouldn't think about piety. This is, you know, how you shouldn't think about justice. This is how you shouldn't think about knowledge. That's still very constructive.
But he certainly characterized himself as a hardline skeptic. You know, the only thing that he knows is that he doesn't know anything, and that's how his accusers framed him. But anyway, putting aside the problem of Socrates, what about these hardline skeptics then? I mean, is it morally incumbent upon us to punish them in some way, to dissuade people, to discourage people from that kind of behavior? And obviously, because we can't dissuade them from doing so through reasons, right? Because they're just asking questions, right? They're not they're not responsive to that kind of question and answer, that kind of dialogue. So we obviously have to engage in some other approach in order to stop them.
Well, maybe what we have to do is just sort of outcompete them. So when I think of the negative figure of the skeptic, I think of the person who is saying, hey, it's all fake news. Don't listen to the mainstream. You know, the person who is thinking, yeah, that stuff about global warming, how do you even know that? Maybe that's not real, right? So I think of that sort of negative skeptical figure. Or the figure who says, we are now in a post-truth world, and they don't even use scare quotes on that. You know, we're in a post-truth world. You know, truth is over. Even I am lying even now at this moment. Corey Lewandowski, right? I think those kinds of figures are very damaging, and what we can do with them is not punish them or put them in jail. I agree with Mill that that's a bad thing to do. What we can do is compete with them and try to figure out the sources of alienation and discontent and poor education that have drawn people to that stance of, yeah, no one knows anything anyway. We have to present a rival narrative. We have to share knowledge and research and the capacity to know in a way that is more positive and more constructive. And there are a lot of initiatives that try to do that, right? I mean, there's outreach programs like Coursera that enable you to study university courses online and so on. I think those are incredibly good and incredibly valuable. And so I think you have to sort of valorize and champion the pursuit of knowledge, as members of a university.
I think one group of really interesting skeptics that kind of fall within this within the kind of problematic of this discussion is Holocaust deniers, for example. They really push this kind of demand for evidence and, well, where is the documentation? Show me a concentration camp, and they're really resistant to this. And obviously, well, the policy in Germany and Austria especially is really, punitive in an institutional way. Right? So do you think that's wrong? Sorry, I'm monopolizing the conversation.
Oh, this is really interesting. So in Canada, we have hate speech laws as well, which outlaw that kind of conduct. I can see that given the peculiar historical circumstances of Germany and Austria, there was probably a need at some historical point in time to have laws of that sort. I'm not sure. I'm much more of a libertarian as far as speech is concerned, and I have some discomfort even with Canada's hate speech laws, even though I think, of course, hate speech is reprehensible and so on. I'm not sure that it should be subject to criminal prosecution in the way that it is, actually. I think, for what that's worth. But yeah, I do think that kind of skepticism could be absolutely toxic. But also that it wouldn't arise in a culture and in a society where you had really strong educational norms and better social policies of inclusion.
Thank you.
I think that's the end of Frege Lectures 2019. So let us thank Jennifer again for very clear